Okay, so welcome back to my trilogy on the top 8 builds to bring into Edge of Fate for day 1, so to speak. I've done Titan, I've done Hunter, check the channel. This is the Warlock version. You can skip straight to the timestamps if you're looking for a specific build. Keep in mind, things are subject to change as we discover the new artifact and the new meta and all the changes. And also, all of the builds are pretty much discussed from a conceptual standpoint, the theory crafting, right? I'm not going to give you dib links because stats are changing and mods and weapons all change from activity to activity. So I try to keep it mostly conceptual, right? So with that in mind, I hope you enjoy, and I look forward to talking to you guys in the comments section and seeing y'all in Edge of Fate. Alright, so here is the guilty loadout, guilty of power creeping every other Warlock build in the game except for maybe Well of Radiance. There's a reason I drew so many Broodweaver comparisons to Prismatic, and it's largely because my favorite way to play Prismatic Warlock, at least as far as Solipsism goes, with the various spirit combos, is by combining my two favorite OG Broodweaver builds into one with Spirit of Necrotic and Swarm. Swarm is not necessary and very swappable with Synthos and Star Eaters, but for an overall neutral game, you're going to want Threadlings regardless. Weaver's Call is awesome for Threadling production and very spammable with Phoenix Dive, which is not even accessible on Strand. So this actually means more Threadlings than Strand, right? Swarm makes it so that you get Threadlings from every single tangle, which is basically the same as having 2/3 of a Threadling grenade like every 10 seconds, on top of having an actual grenade, right? Never mind all of the tangles that you can steal from your teammates. Now, I know Swarm doesn't unravel like the core version, right? So you'd be right to say it's only half as good as the Spirit, and therefore the Spirit version is trash, right? But when you think about what Unravel is, it's really just damage over time that spreads, right? And that's exactly what Spirit of Necrotic does. Plus, you still have 3 Arcane Needles, right? And then you have unlimited ones while you're Transcendent. So really, there's just as much damage over time and ad clear going on with Necrotic and Swarm, if not more than there would be on either core version on the core Strand subclass. Now, same goes for Necrotic. You might argue that unlike the Spirit version, the core version ramps up damage over time, right? By a lot, and is therefore better for beefy targets, and you'd be right about that. So I guess I would argue back that if you have Necrotics on Strand, then you don't have Swarmers, or Synthos, or Star Eaters, and you also don't have Radiant, Weaken, Transcendence, nor do you have a Nova Bomb or a Song of Flame. So I don't know what to tell you other than the ramping up of poison damage on core Necrotic is far, far, far outweighed by everything else Prismatic has to offer. Also, you still get the additional poison spreading on Glaives, right, as you see in the gameplay, on Weapons of Sorrow as well, like what Osteostriga, Thorn, so it's very versatile, very effective at what it needs to do, and both Osteo and Thorn and Necrochasm are all overcharged in Edge of Fate for 25% extra damage. The only time I ever stray from the Threadlings on this build is if I'm hell-bent on a Hellion, right, during DPS, and I can't go without Devour, which really only happens if I'm trying to show off my damage numbers at the end of a dungeon, right, or on the wipe screen. But other than that, if I want to play Bleak Watcher, I'm typically on Rhymecoat or Getaway. So as far as Solipsism goes, I found myself most often coming back to these combos and gameplay style, right? And even for Lightning Surge builds, since Facet of Blessing and Purpose, with things like Heavy-Handed and Recuperation, make up for some of the loss of Devour, right? Enabling you to still play aggressively, as you see me doing in this Expert Onslaught gameplay, which would have been better, by the way, displayed if it was Scorn instead of Cabal, drop pods gatekeeping my confidence. So you may wonder, well, what about Spirit of Inmost? Because I know it's a favorite for literally every single Prismatic class, but as I mentioned in my previous Titan and Hunter versions of this video, Spirit of Inmost doesn't make a difference when you're Transcendence, and you can become Transcendent very rapidly as it stands right now in Heresy, so I prefer necrotic because then you actually get an additional effect, right? As soon as you get transcendent, it's game over, and you can just lightning surge and throw arcane needles like crazy, and everything is exploding into pools of poison and spreading all over, right? Inmost doesn't do anything. It just slightly improves your ability regen when you're not transcendent. And that's when I just decide to play it safe and use my weapons and make decisions a little bit more carefully, and I build my meter back up. As far as that meter goes, I like to build all of my prismatic builds with roughly equal light and dark damage output. So if I'm using threadlings, then a vortex grenade is kind of a no-brainer, right? Side note here on vortex grenades, obviously add weakening on there from Facet of Dominance, but I mean, come on. Vortex grenades are pretty much the best in the game, and when you become transcendent, you're basically still throwing vortex grenades, only bigger and better. So it also makes for very smooth gameplay when transitioning between transcendence and non-transcendence. I mean, you basically have better than chaos accelerant vortex grenades on prismatic, which is absolutely nuts, and it's the reason that I haven't touched Voidlock I think since Briarbinds came out in Season of the Wish, right? But as far as reasons to stray from this build, if I'm using Lightning Surge instead of my needles, then I might consider a Threadling Grenade instead of a Vortex for more darkness energy. But I'm generally always on Vortex Grenade, right? Weapons, I mean, your weapons can also be the single biggest factor in building your Transcendence anyways. So, as we've seen with the likes of Lost Signal and Velocity Baton, but area denials are being nerfed, right? So you may need better ability balances in Edge of Fate than you do currently. Obviously, weapons will still contribute, but I'm just making the point that light and dark balance should be a top priority for prismatic build crafting in general. So with this build in particular, I generally like to go with Nova Bomb because it's the best burst super in the game that Warlock has to offer, and when you enhance it with Facet of Courage, a Weakening Source, Feast of Light ×6, it easily competes with your Curious T-Crashes and Nighthawk Golden Guns. I mean, hands down. Running a Void Super also gets you access to Void Overshields with Facet of Purpose, so I mean, you could become pretty tanky in an instant, especially since the Overshield hit point buff that Bungie implemented, right? When did that come out? Final Shape? I can't remember, but way better than the old Void Overshields. I think it's now better than most of the alternatives that Purpose has to offer. Purpose is great, but it's very frugal with its timer on Woven Mail and Restoration and Frost Armor stacks. I farmed Vesper's Host exclusively on this build when I was on my Warlock, and I was always pumping out top tier damage with Necrotic and Stargaters. One thing I've come to appreciate about exotic class items is that they're easily hot swapped, even more so than loadouts, because none of them have unique stats. You just set your mods up the same on all of them, and all you have to worry about is your one build, your one loadout. It's so much more efficient than setting up multiple loadouts with like 40 different mods to scrutinize, right? So I'm a fan, but when Edge of Fate launches, this interaction may change because of the stats, so it may be a little bit more painstaking depending on it, like if they add unique stats to the class items, but I don't know yet, so we'll see. I'm just saying that like the dungeon farming and build crafting experience together, it's really good when you just have one loadout and a few of your favorite class items to swap to during different encounters, maybe your weapons here and there. I find it's just way better than setting up multiple loadouts. Okay, so all that to say, I think it's going to take some major nerfs to make prismatic subclasses less attractive, or some major buffs to the core classes to essentially power creep prismatic. But like we just learned, Bungie is buffing my build, and I think it's because they notice too many people are sleeping on Weaver's Trance. But not me. Been using this build to farm GMs, dungeons, raids, Onslaught, and I've been making videos about it since the Final Shape release, so be sure to flip through my video catalog, and you can see the full evolution of the build and all of the god roll loot it's gotten me. Okay, so then I got Speaker Sight. Solar hasn't been in the artifact for like a year, but still, if you've joined or are still joining LFG posts or Fireteam Finder for something like a Master Raid challenge, and you don't show up using this build, you'll basically be considered an asshole. Right. I'm obviously exaggerating, but it's true that you should fall in line as a proper support Warlock with a well in at least one of your loadouts. But like I said, Solar has been essentially vacant from the last 2 artifacts, right? Yet, Solar Warlocks are still all over Fireteam Finder posts for GMs, dungeons, raids, especially for Master, right? And now Ultimatum content. Well's been nerfed, but it's still the only thing like it in the game. Everyone still wants one, and frankly demand it to the point that you will be straight up excluded or kicked from fire teams without it, right? The healing turret from Speaker Sight has been nerfed as well, and yet it's still the only thing like it, outside of maybe the exotic glaive. So there's now a delay in the Seekers getting to you since it only targets you when you're critical. But, I mean, so essentially you're at greater risk of dying in general compared to before, but especially so when you're further away from the turret, since the Seekers are also slow moving, right? But nonetheless, 1 turret plus 1 well together at the same spot, and it's like neither well nor Speaker Sight was ever nerfed, which kind of necessitates the build since people die in wells actually much more now than before the final shape released. Like people are dying faster in wells than they are running around smacking the boss with a glaive and 7 different resist buffs from Prismatic, right? So not quite, but almost. I mean, frankly, there's nothing much I could say about the build that is super serious, because I think any serious Warlock just knows how good it is already and probably has it saved in a loadout already, right? I mean, I could think of a couple tips and pointers to consider when using Speaker Sight as far as aspects, fragments, and gameplay loop, right? Just your basic theory. It's actually very important to get this right, because if your teammates are dying, it's going to be your fault, right, according to them. And I would probably have to agree with them unless they're intentionally trying to kill themselves. So, Ember of Benevolence, right, you get your dive or your rift back, basically at quadruple the rate, including your melee and your grenade. So this is probably the most important thing to have on the entire subclass outside of a well and a healing grenade. And that's mainly because the exotic only functions with the healing grenade, but you know, it's a full-on Fireteam support build, so well is usually the #1 choice for super, outside of some rare case scenarios where Song of Flame may be better, and in that case you'd probably be looking at a Prismatic build instead. But yeah, spam your abilities near your allies and you get more abilities. That's what Ember of Benevolence does. I guess that could lead me to possibly the second most important subclass consideration, which is Touch of Flame. You get Restoration ×2 instead from your healing turret or any healing grenade on any build using this aspect. Right, so Resto ×2 is significantly more potent than ×1, but you're the only one that gets it as far as I know. Right, everyone else still gets ×1, so it's a bit of a selfish choice in some sense, but if you're having trouble staying alive, then it should be a top priority, because the only thing that fire teams hate more than a non-solar Warlock is a dead one. Okay, third point here, and by no means are these in any official order, right? So Ember of Singeing and Ashes with Hellion. This is your one route to selfishness. You will give your teammates more dives and rifts, but at the same time, you're scorching things to the max with Hellion and Ashes. You're staggering the bosses, setting off ignitions. Right? It's a win-win for selfishness and selflessness. So, I mean, if you hate playing support, this is your one fun fact that you're allowed to have. So on that note, my next favorite build, actually my favorite build for Solar Warlock, that actually synchronizes quite well with Speaker Sight if you want to, you know, drop a well, throw your healing turret for your fire team, and then swap to something that does more damage to bosses. Dawn Chorus. It adds 3 times the amount of scorch damage, right? Every damage take also gives you melee energy, which is a nice little bonus, right? If you're solo or in a fire team that's more chill, you can also use Daybreak as your super, since Dawn Chorus nearly doubles its damage output. It's actually pretty viable. It's not really about Daybreak though, as much as it is the Scorch and the synergy that you get when combining weapons and abilities that also Scorch, right? great build to use in GMs with Polaris Lance, or in dungeons or onslaughts with Dragon's Breath, 1K voices, anything that scorches, right? It's just better with Dawn Cores. So I find it's the most suitable solar build for most types of endgame content. The main thing you want from your subclass is to make sure that you have Ember of Ashes, since Ashes also increases your Scorch effects by allowing you to build stacks faster, leading to more ignitions. Right? This is different than Dawn Chorus. Dawn Chorus is buffed to Scorch. One of them increases damage over time, the other increases Scorch stacks, so that you get to 100 stacks faster, and therefore you're setting off more ignitions, right? A little nuanced detail there. If you can afford it, also use Ember of Char to make your ignitions even better, because then you spread Scorch alongside the ignitions to all nearby enemies, right? And this could lead to one of the coolest effects in Destiny 2, ignition chaining. And you only really get to witness this on occasion, depending on the seasonal artifact and whether it has mods like solar fulmination or whatever it was, right? But even without all that, this build is more likely than most builds in the game to set off those types of fireworks. I still run a healing grenade with Helion and Celestial Fire on this build, just like I do for Speaker Sight, and the reason for that is Helion is insane for passive damage and setting off ignitions, probably the best anti-unstoppable ability in the game. And since Scorch is so central, then you can also use Ember of Singeing, right, to make this makes your Helion like 4 or 5 times more spammable. I think it increases class ability energy on Scorch tick, right? You don't even have to kill anything, just Scorch stuff. And it increases your class ability by like 300 or 400%, right? This also makes the build more sustainable and survivable, because obviously you're spamming more Phoenix Dives or dropping more Rifts. But the healing grenade is great to have in your back pocket, and I generally find that Helion, scorching exotic weapons, incandescent, all the various ways that we have to spread Scorch in the game, it's plenty. There's plenty of things to keep the battlefield cooking, right? Pretty much perpetually. You need the balance of safety with the healing nade, but in my opinion, anyways. But I wouldn't argue if you said heal clip on your bread and butter ad clear weapon does the job well enough, right, alongside your Phoenix Dive. Okay, going from hot to cold, I then have Bleak Watcher. I love Bleak Watcher. Getaway Artist has been a real staple for most of us on Prismatic Warlock, but in Revenant we got Rhymecoat Raiment, which launched with a slew of stasis-themed artifact mods. And this thing basically power crept Getaway into irrelevance. And the thing is, Getaway Artist was and is still meta, but so is Rhymecoat. So a bit of a paradox, but I chose to use Rhymecoat for my main Prismatic Stasis loadout, and Getaway Artist now has a new job for me in the realm of Bolt Charge, but over there it's still double turret build, only on Arc instead of Prismatic, and it's never too far away if I want to bring it back to Prismatic. But before I get too far into that loadout, returning to Rhymecoat, awful looking dress, desperately needs an ornament, preferably something masculine so that I can actually change back to a dude warlock once in a while, instead of being forced into dresses and robes all the time. But personal taste aside, Rhymecoat does the Bleak Watcher turret better than anything in the game when it comes to locking down areas, protecting yourself with cover simultaneously, cover that also acts like a glacial grenade that you can shatter. So, I mean, super cool. Throw it at the enemy, throw it at your feet. Either way, it's insanely effective at crowd control and ad manipulation. Not only that, but when you stand in your little fort, you get those icicle bullets that slow and freeze stuff, like how Titan gets to shoot bolt charge from their barricades, kind of the same concept. Very cool interaction. And if you use Song of Flame, like I am with this build, then you can shoot scorching rounds at the same time, which was probably my coolest discovery in playtesting this build. So the reason I'm not even bothering with Shadebinder Core Stasis Warlock is for the exact same reason that my Solipsism build makes most Broodweaver and Voidlock builds completely obsolete. Like, all Stasis has to offer is extra Frost Armor, and even that doesn't compare to the impact that Prismatic build crafting choices have to offer. You can spam a lot of turrets with Devour as if you're using Whisper of Shards. You do more shatter damage with Facet of Ruin, just like you can with Whisper of Fissures. And most importantly, you're not stuck using the worst super in the game. You get 3 melees instead of 1, right? The list goes on. But anyways, the way I've been having fun on this build is by embracing the whole ice and fire theme, as I alluded to with Song of Flame. You get your Transcendence meter taken care of this way, and Facet of Ruin is working on both fronts for bigger ignitions and better shatter damage. And the thing is, solar damage in Edge of Fate is going to do more damage to stasis and strand debuffed enemies, so this is the perfect scenario for the build to shine. I like making elemental pickups with this build, with Facet of Awakening. That way, like a heal clip incandescent weapon can make you fire sprites. Fire sprites give you grenade energy, so you get more Bleak Watcher energy. Dragon's Breath can also do this without Awakening. You get tons of fire sprites, and frankly, Dragon's Breath also does probably a better job than most weapons in the game at automatically shattering your automatically spawning stasis crystals from your Rime Coat enhanced Bleak Watcher. Right, you just throw your turret if you can afford it, stick the ground with a Dragon's Breath shot nearby, and you've laid a pretty lethal trap that is unlike most effects in the game. Very fun build. Great for any activity, but especially so in Onslaught, and a lot of GMs, right? Especially like Battleground style Nightfalls. Super good. Okay, so then I've got my 2 bolt charge loadouts, this is the current meta. I've already done a couple videos on this setup this season. There's 2 loadouts, one for damage with Geomags, and Chaos Reach obviously, and one for your neutral gameplay with Getaway Artist, right, with double turrets and Electrostatic Mine, so it's like having 3 aspects. You got your Arc Soul, you got your Ionic Sentry, and you have the best Ionic Trace producing aspect in the game with Electrostatic Mine. You can also use this loadout to copy up to your blanks, like as far as the Getaway Artist, to switch it to Prismatic for Bleak Watcher instead of Sentry. Right? It's really a matter of preference when it comes to Getaway Artists and how you want to pair up with your Arc Soul. But personally, Stormcaller is my favorite core subclass for Warlock. It always has been, so I'm keeping my setup like this. And like I said, if I'm in a Bleak Watcher mood, I'll go mess around on the previous build. Anyways, if you want more info on it, like I said, I highly recommend you just go check out my videos from this season. Just go to my page. There's not that many videos that I put out this season. Easy to find, and they're very popular. So, I mean, check them out. Well, very popular from my perspective with having 2,000 subs. Or not quite, so make sure to subscribe and actually get me to 2,000. I appreciate it. But yeah, I know Arc is getting ousted from the artifact in Edge of Fate, and Bolt Charge may be a lot worse than it is now, but I know for a fact I'm still going to be craving this build. Heck, when the final shape released, I used Stormcaller to solo the entire Legendary campaign. I gradually transitioned into Getaway Artist doing that, but this will likely be a very good build for the new campaign, especially now that we have Ionic Sentry. And especially without having all of the new stuff unlocked, right? That's going to be a process, so it'll be a good day 1 setup. And I think it's going to be good throughout Edge of Fate. Still, even without Arc, at the very least, I'm going to be having fun, right? Plus, nothing is quite like Chaos Reach and Geomags, right? Sometimes it's the best super to use for certain situations, so you can't really go wrong by taking the current meta and bringing it into the new season to at least test it at the very least. Okay, so then I've got Broodweaver. Broodweaver is a tough pill to swallow, to be completely honest. The subclass wants you to lean into Threadlings and Unravel, but you can basically get the exact same thing on a better overall subclass in Prismatic, right? As I've already mentioned tons of times. Weaver's Call and Arcane Needle are available on both, so what would be the point of even bothering with Core Strand, right? So I could touch on that. Well, technically, Broodweaver offers better Threadlings with Thread of Evolution, right? But the problem is that Threadlings have already been buffed to a point where they basically one-shot red bars now, even without Evolution. And since they're only intended and useful for passive ad clear anyways, then the bonus damage is pretty irrelevant, right? I mean, the tracking is nice, but I mean that's pretty marginal. And of course, it makes for a better Needle Storm for sure, right? Because your Needle Storm is laced with threadlings. But even then, like, Prismatic can just do a transcendent Feast of Light Needle Storm on a weakened enemy, which arguably far outweighs the latter. So, I mean, this is the reality that I've come to experience in revisiting Broodweaver recently. Like, Prismatic does all the same flavor, but better, much better. Except for this one strand loadout that I saved from farming Legend Onslaught back into the light. I brought it back into my loadouts. Karnstein's Karnstein armlets with Weaver's Trance, not Weaver's Call, Weaver's Trance, and Suspending Tangles. Right? It's a crowd control glaive build that doesn't rely on threadlings whatsoever, and I think Core Strand does this style of build better than most builds in the game. For contrast, you can freeze on Prismatic, but you can't suspend, right? In Edge of Fate, freeze is also no longer going to stun unstoppable champions, but suspend still will. So there's an attractive reason here. On top of that, suspend is getting buffed. Like Bungie told us, they're giving us an extra second of suspend, which doesn't sound like a lot. But when Bungie nerfed suspend by only 2 seconds in the final shape, it basically killed all suspend builds in the game. So by adding a second, you would think at least half of the people that are disgusted with the current suspend effect should at least be willing to give it another shot now. But anyways, with or without the buff, I still use this build and I don't notice a difference because the enemies typically die before they can ever unsuspend. And since I could suspend stuff back to back anyways, then the timer isn't much of an issue. So as much as I want to sell this build based on the suspend buff, I don't think it matters one bit. Rope them up, cut them down, easily stay alive with Karnstein's Restoration and Cure on every glaive kill, melee kill, and finisher. Super simple, super good. Especially since you can't get Resto from the Strand subclass, right? I mean, this isn't Prismatic, so I'm basically stealing the concept of Prismatic by stealing buffs from other subclasses with good exotic choices. So Karnstein's for some Solar, Buried Bloodline for some Void, Devour, Weaken, right? I'll talk about that more in a second. But the cool thing here is that glaives actually have more synergy with this build than most. I know Bungie is about to finally make glaives work with aspects that buff uncharged melees like Knockout on Titan, for example, but for the past 2 years, glaives, since they released, have worked with basically nothing, right? But glaive kills do work with Weaver's Trance, and not only that, but you can also produce orbs of power from suspend kills through Thread of Wisdom, which is pretty cool. How else does one normally make orbs of power from glaive melee kills? You don't, right? Siphon mods don't work. This is the biggest annoyance if you're dedicated to a glaive build, because you get in there and you start hacking and you soon figure out that you're not making any orbs like you would if you're using weapons or abilities. So in this case, Thread of Wisdom is giving me orbs from my glaive kills, and then the orbs are giving me Woven Mail from Thread of Warding, plus all the benefits that orbs give you from your boot mods, such as recuperation and more Weaver's Trance energy from Innervation. So if you build it and play it right on every glaive kill, you will get Cure, Restoration, Devour, Woven Mail, and you're going to suspend everything around you. Pretty close to Prismatic. People forget that Warlock has some of the best access to suspend in the game. It's right up there with Abeyant Leaps Titan, Six Coyote, Widow Silk Hunter. I know it's automatic to think Strand Warlock must play like into Threadlings and minions, but I mean that's old news, to be completely honest, and it's just been power crept. So aspects. Weaver's Trance is pretty foundational here. So you need to make sure that you can keep your grenade going, Thread of Generation, right, with high discipline, some help from combat mods such as Innervation, Impact Induction, or from your weapons by using perks such as Demolitionist. You can definitely get 30-second shackles for back-to-back Weaver's Trance. You can even up it even further with Devour, again, from Buried Bloodline for more grenade energy on every kill. And it's also going to keep you alive on every kill, glaive or otherwise. Then you got the Wanderer. When you think about it, suspending with your tangles may seem like a less consistent or controllable way of suspending enemies, but in my experience is very consistent, right? Because you make tangle, excuse me, you make tangles every 10 or 12 seconds now. I can't remember. And you can also steal your teammates' tangles, right? A shackle grenade has a 2 minute and 30 second cooldown, and even though you can min-max that down to 30 seconds as I just explained, you can just suspend every few seconds with tangles, and you don't even have to kill anything to do it, right? You can just auto suspend yellow bars and champions without having to find a red bar near it to kill first. So very, very good. And for me personally, I just use both aspects. That way I can suspend stuff all the time in multiple different ways. But if you really wanted some threadlings in there, I think the build is still viable without the Wanderer. Like if you wanted to go Weaver's Call, then that's it. Weaver's Call, not to confuse myself with Weaver's Trance, Weaver's Call is about to be buffed, right? So this is the thing. I think it might offer 3 fragments on core now, and it's going to work with like any weapons. I think maybe any abilities. So it may be worthwhile to trade it out for like the Wanderer and then tack on Thread of Evolution, but we'll see. Threadlings, good Threadlings, better super. Personally, I still think Prismatic or Swarmers is the way to go for that if you're really trying to soup up your Threadlings. But I mean, this is the rope them up, cut them down build. So without changing the core identity of the build, this is just what I would do. Just focus everything into suspend. Okay, and then finally I've got Starfire Protocol. Frankly, I just threw it in here because I know it's going to be mentioned, and literally every content creator is already predicting it's going to be the absolute meta in Edge of Fate. It's been the absolute meta before for a long time, right? And even then, the only time that I was really using it was during damage phases and dungeons and raids. And part of that is because generally a healing grenade is more viable than a fusion grenade. Fusion grenades, even with Touch of Flame and the double explosions, the tracking is awful on them. And like for me personally, I have to use fastball or I'm just missing targets left and right. It wants you to use an Empowering Rift, which is like the least viable rift to use. I know it's gonna be better than it has been since it was nerfed, but I'm still doubtful that it's gonna be as good as it was. And even if it is, I still think that there's probably better builds to use. But I'm throwing it in here for now. I'm not gonna discuss the build. I'm just gonna leave it at that, and I'll update you in Edge of Fate, as I'm sure everybody else will. Anyway, so that's it for this video for my top 8 Warlock builds going into Edge of Fate. I hope you enjoyed. This was actually more difficult for me to make than the Titan and Hunter one, not because I play Warlock less. I think I play Warlock about as equally as I do on my Hunter, maybe not quite as much as my Titan, which I main. But yeah, it was difficult because I find that in the 7th and 8th spots of this, top builds type of video, it's too hard to just pick like the last 2 because there's so many viable builds competing for that last slot. Like think of Xenotath and how clutch that can be in raids, right? Especially going into like a day 1 raid. I really struggled with putting Starfire on there, and even Karnstein's over something like Xenotath, and of course some other builds as well. But it is what it is. So I hope you enjoyed. Let me know what you think in the comment section. I greatly appreciate all of the discussion there, as always. So take care. I'll talk to you next time.